So I'm Sunil Menon. I sit in the product organization. I lead all things strategy and marketing for our customer journeys portfolio. Right, so all the things we talk about with our Journey Optimizer product and all the things we think about customer engagement more broadly. Right? Been here about 8 years at Adobe, and then prior to that, a good 20 years in content management, analytics, personalization, so digital marketing more broadly. That's kind of my background. So, for the specific questions, areas we want to kind of focus on, I'm happy to kind of,
I think, if you could start off by just giving us a bit of a background on digital journeys, why that's becoming necessary, I suppose. I mean, we've heard a lot about that through the conference, but certainly would like to get your perspective on that as a starting point.
Yeah, so this is something that we started to see in market almost 3-4 years ago, right? As we talked to a lot of our clients, start on the B2C side, but now it's also happening on the B2B side, where if you think of yourself as a consumer, right, you are really sort of dictating when and where and how you want to engage with the brand, right? So you're really in control. And so when brands start to see that shift take place, the traditional sort of approach of how you think of marketing, which was, hey, the brand initiates a conversation, right, or a communication with the end customer, started to get a little bit disrupted because while that was happening, you were on the website, you were in the mobile app, you were calling the call center.
We're really engaged.
Right. Mm-hmm. And those signals were not making its way through to the marketing systems that were sending the communications out, right? And so we said, how do we really sort of reorient how marketing approaches this problem in a way where we want to put the customer at the center of the strategy. And the moment you say the customer is at the center of the strategy, you have to shift from marketing pushing messages out. I mean, there's still a place for that, but how do you sort of be more adaptive and reactive to customer signals, which means then all of a sudden that becomes a digital journey, right? And how do you sort of stitch that together and make sure that every interaction that the consumer has with a brand feels like it was connected to the previous time they had the conversation or engagement with the brand, right?
Some continuity there.
The continuity, right? And that also makes the consumer feel like the brand knows them, right? So there's a little bit of a personal sort of influence in that. So that really drove us to think about, okay, what does that look like from a marketing technology perspective in this new world? And at the heart of it was this need to say, if all these various interactions need to be connected, then you all need to have the same view of who the consumer is, right? And all the signals that you're getting from the consumer have to be collected in one place, because my campaign that goes out on Monday morning needs to know that on Sunday night, if your credit card transaction didn't go through or you had a bad experience with the product that you own, that signal needs to flow back into the marketing system so that maybe I don't send you the marketing message on Monday morning, right? And so we had to sort of think about this very holistically to say, let's build this on a foundational platform where all of this data comes together. You have a view of the customer that is constantly kept up to date with all the signals. And then we can make decisions on what's the next thing to do for the consumer in their interest. Again, if you put the consumer sort of at the heart of it, right? So the other thing we think about is, how do we look at the KPIs that the brand is trying to optimize for? The traditional approach has always been, I'm interested in more clicks or more conversions or more revenue, which is still important.
But a bit of a blunt tool,
right? Yeah. But the thing is, how do you make sure the consumer gets their goals met, right? And that requires us to think about this as a journey, as opposed to, let me send you an email for a campaign this morning, and then let's come back and next Friday and send you another email, right? You have to really rethink that process, right?
Absolutely. Now that all sounds great in theory, but I would imagine that doing it at scale becomes incredibly challenging.
Correct, and this is where technology and AI can help. Okay, if you think about something as simple as, how do I process all these signals that I'm getting from consumers on the website, in the mobile application, right, in the call center, it becomes very hard for a human to sort of process that at scale, right? Especially if you've got millions and millions of consumers. So then this is kind of where both the technology that we built and the AI that we apply in the technology to help really then provides both the ability to process this at scale, but also to take action at scale.
Absolutely.
Can I ask, A lot of what's been said, and I know there's lots of new technology and AI there, but could you also for this camera, a lot of what we're hearing in these sort of stories about the journeys has been very normal in CRM systems for a long time, like lead scoring. They went to a web page and they accepted a call and everything. Could you say what's different and new about this time, and how it's not just a rebranded sort of lead scoring journey?
But the lead scoring process works in a long journey or a long process that you have, which may be a considered purchase sort of scenario, right? I'm buying a car, it's going to be, a well thought out sort of, long journey to go buy a car, right? So some of those techniques and tactics hold, but the focus is a little bit different, right? Because here, you're not trying to do lead scoring for B2C. You're not doing lead scoring like you would do in the B2B world, right? But similarly, you're trying to figure, can I detect intent, right? From the engagement, from the interactions I'm having, which will allow me to place the best content or the best offer or the best product in front of the customer. Because at the end of the day, B2C buying is still very much impulse transactional kind of buying, right? So which means then you have to get their attention and put the right content in front of them to get them to make that transaction, right? So there's some similarities, but I would say that the approach is very different and the journeys tend to be much smaller, right? In B2C journeys, we typically see those are probably 30, 45-day journeys, whereas in B2B, those could be 12-month journeys, right?
And how improved now is a lot of companies still spam out the same ad and leave it up for like months, but we see quite a few demonstrations over the summit where they can be measured to see, well, this one's got a lot less effective, so it's going to be swapped out and what have you. So how is that helping? And have you got any insights as to just what a big difference that can make?
Yeah, and so we've actually been doing this for quite some time with our personalization capabilities, right? If you think about again, this is where to your question about where can AI help, especially to do this at scale.
I'm just going to say the word ad fatigue because that's what I was trying to.
Yes, right.
Sums it up straight away, but I forgot
exactly, it. Right? And that's a really important part of how we think about. Again, if you're using AI and automation to make some of these decisions on the fly, that decision-making system also has to consider the preference of the consumer, the privacy of the data, right? The security of the data, and what's the governance that the brand has to put in place to make sure that, at the end of the day, we're still doing things with respecting the consumer intent. But having said that, I would argue that because we're able to get and process signals, in real time now, you can make some of those decisions where, hey, I don't need to show you the same content every time you come back to the website or every time you're in the mobile application. I can make a decision to say, hey, based on all the behavior that you've exhibited, a different product or a different piece of content might actually get you to take the action that you need to take, and can we make that decision in real time and swap something out for you, right? And it may be different for you than for him or for me, okay? So that's the technology is there now for us to do this, where we've talked about personalization now for 10, 15 years, right? Yeah. But where I think the market and the space has evolved is, in 10 years ago, personalization meant I have 1 million customers, I'm going to segment them into maybe 3 or 4 groups, and I'm going to show 4 personalized, pieces of content, right? But if I did that for email, maybe I can do it for web. Maybe there's some connectivity between those two, right? But that's still maybe 7 or 8, pieces of content that gets used. Now, where the technology is, it helps us to think about this well. I don't have to think about it just as 4 big buckets in that 1 million customers. I can do real micro segmentation, maybe even get to a one-to-one basis, where I can then give you the content that's just exactly right for you. And it might mean I need 10,000 pieces of content to make that happen. And now that has always been the other bottleneck, right, to drive personalization at this level of scale. But with AI and generative AI, I can create 10,000 variations if I need to, right? Of course, having a human in the loop and the brand, safety and all of that. But we're at this point in time where truly we can think about personalization for every individual at every point of engagement and to drive this, at real-time scale. And I think that's the difference, right? And we believe we've got the platform to do that.
Yes. All that to sell Cokes.
Or
what have you.
But 2.2 whatever, billion sort of Cokes a day.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It adds up.
it's good business.
It adds up.
One of the things, having been covering this for long enough, is that suddenly all websites had like privacy things, and you had to accept cookies. And to me, it's just, well, isn't that totally pointless? Because everything's tracked one way or another. The people think it's a huge privacy win, but actually, I don't even know what it stops anymore because
I'm not
no one's
sure.
using them.
I
Or
don't think I necessarily agree.
oh,
right?
could you? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll explain why. Okay, because there are regulations now that prevent brands from not using information if the customer hasn't opted in. Okay. Now, what we as a vendor have the obligation to do is to make sure we provide the platform and the capabilities to let brands adhere to those regulations, right? So one of the things that we spend a lot of time thinking about within Adobe is at the core platform layer, can we sort of give brands the ability to label the data that we collect, right? Based on usage, based on privacy, based on the enforcement that we need to have in the system, so that even accidentally, if I'm somebody in marketing and I want to go build an audience of people that may have, say, a specific medical condition as an example, I will not be allowed to do it because I can never use that for marketing purposes, right? So that governance and the policies get set at the foundational sub-platform layer that allows brands to make sure that there's the right governance in place, okay? Now, are there going to be brands that may ignore that and screw? But that's not, as a vendor, our obligation is to make sure you have the tools to conform and adhere to those regulations. And that is at the heart of everything that we do, right? So when we think about why we built the platform, not only was it a way to bring all the customer data together, but by bringing it together, we have one place to specify what the policies are, what the security is, what the governance should be, so that everything that sits on top of it, including how do I build an audience and then activate that audience, where is that audience being activated? How does that audience get used in a campaign or in a customer journey? How does that audience get sort of used when I think about personalization, right? Up and down the stack, we are conforming to the policy that the brand has set. Okay, so that for me, we are extremely passionate about that, and we, in fact, every AI, the other part of this I'll explain. Everything that we do with AI, Adobe has an AI ethics review board. Okay, it's an independent sort of group that sits outside the product organization, and every product team has to pass their audit to make sure that one, there's no bias, either explicit or implicit, that we've used the right data to train the models, that the way the feature and the capability gets surfaced is being done, with privacy, security, and sort of governance in mind, and that we are sort of adhering to all of the ethical guidelines that we've set within Adobe, right? So we take a lot of this very seriously as we think about all the AI work that we do, whether it's AI or generative AI, or now even with the agents.
Could you tell us maybe what customers have implemented this at this point?
So we've had the platform, experience platform in market for 5+ years, right? So we've got hundreds of customers that are now using this. They've standardized on this as their, what I want to call their operational profile of their customer. And then the use cases that they've implemented on this vary from, hey, I need to make sure that how I run my paid media campaigns, because I'm going to Google or Meta and I'm trying to reach my customers there, is being done with the right level of governance, right? And I'm optimizing sort of how I spend my dollars there. All the way to how do I think about, how this gets used in the context of a campaign or a journey, okay? All the way through to now, how are brands rethinking what would have been a channel-centric approach to marketing engagement to this journey-centric orientation, right? that has introduced, like from a customer perspective, a question about change management.
Absolutely.
Right? Because if I'm the email team and you're the mobile team and you're the web team, and historically I've run campaigns independently, maybe with some loose connectivity, what does the new world look like where I have a customer journey where it starts an email, goes to a mobile app, and then from there maybe goes to a website, or the other way around, right?
Becomes territorial.
It becomes territorial. And what does the organizational design look like to support that? Who gets to approve the journey? Who gets to approve the content that gets used in the journey? So we have all these conversations with customers, right? And that is where I do think, the technology and the people process have to come together.
Absolutely. I mean, it becomes a maturity question as well, doesn't it? And I think you're spot on with the raising the issue of change management. We've seen a couple of folks, like Bridget from Prudential, talking about how that maturity and starting with solid foundations and building on them, and then taking the people along.
Yeah.
Like your internal people need to go on that journey as well before you do the customer
Exactly.
journey.
And so in fact, in the B2B sort of keynote today, I had NVIDIA on stage with me, and they were talking about how they're using AI in their marketing processes. But a big part of what they had to do was figure out how do they get their teams, right, to adopt AI.
Yeah.
What's the governance that needs to be in place for that? And how do they get people skilled and onboarded to use AI in sort of today's age, right? And so change management is a really important part of all of this.
Absolutely. I think it was Hillary who gave a very good keynote. I thought fantastic. She managed to gazump Jamie Dimon on her first keynote. I thought hers was a standout, where she made that point very clearly. You see the shiny AI stuff, looks awesome, and technologists are notorious for this. And I think marketers also tend to get caught up in the hype. Yeah, this is fantastic. You buy it and you spend a lot of money on implementing, and you forget all about the fact that if your people aren't going to use it, waste of time.
Correct. And we've had to, think through that even within Adobe, right? So, in our product organization, as an example, I'll give you sort of a case in point. We create product documentation, right, for practitioners to learn how to use the products. Traditionally, sort of done in a way where it's long form content, right? Let me describe the feature, and then I have a link from this feature to another feature, and it's like reading a book in some sense, right? Or a web page. We asked our AI agent, right, an assistant, to index all of that product documentation so that in the product, as a practitioner, I can have a conversational, experience to ask how to use a feature, or what's the best way to think about, the capability. And so all of a sudden now, the response that it was coming back with was content summarized from product documentation. Okay. Now, in the new world, if that is the way in which content is getting consumed, how do we think about creating content that is going to be consumed by an AI agent, right, as opposed to a human?
I wish Google would think that.
Right, and so you think about sort of what that means, right, in more modular content, right, the metadata strategy that goes with it. How do we think about sort of assembling content on the fly from all these bits and pieces of information? So what does it mean for a brand now when I'm creating content where instead of creating a 3-page white paper that describes what the product does, I have to create fragments of information, and then the AI will assemble it on the fly, right? So that's another sort of element of change management here in terms of how we think about.
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because you've got to kind of change your entire approach, because the way the content can be accessed and used is changed.
Right, and even to think about what Perplexity is doing now against a traditional sort of search model, right? I find so much value now in going to an LLM, right? Whether it's Gemini or DeepSeek or Perplexity, pick any one of those options, because the search experience now is a lot more conversational.
Yeah.
Right. So I can refine the prompts as we find and get information. But if that is how consumers or even business persons are going to find information about a product or a service, what does that mean for the brand that's historically authored content for SEO, on the website for Google to index and bring up, right? So those are all the things we think about in terms of what are the implications of that.
Can I ask on that? It's your technology should be able to identify all the bots out there, or a lot of them. If there's so much click fraud and ad fraud out there, that have you got something set up where it's like even a flag going, this is probably not a human being?
So with our analytics capabilities, as we think about measuring, digital, analytics on a website, for example, right? We have AI sort of based capabilities now that allow us to do things like anomaly detection, right? And so an example of that could be, hey, on a day-to-day basis, let's say I get 1 million hits on my website, right? All of a sudden today I'm seeing 10 million hits and I haven't launched a new campaign or haven't done anything to push more people to my website. Well, that's unusual. Can the analytics now alert the user to say, hey, something's happening, go take a look at it, right? And if we can even detect now based on the signals that we're getting that, hey, all of the hits are coming from one IP address or one location or whatever, that could be a signal that maybe it's a bot, right? So yes, there are some foundational capabilities in the platform to kind of help with that, but it's supporting kind of what we would consider kind of the analytics use cases, or it would be the same thing would be true even in conversion for engagement, right? If I'm sending an email and I have an evergreen campaign going and I know what my open rate is for my email, right, and the number of people that are opening the emails that get sent to them, and all of a sudden if that open rate drops dramatically, then maybe something's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe the ISP is blocking the emails, or maybe the content suddenly is no longer relevant, right? So can the AI detect that and then alert the marketing user to say, hey, you might want to check this out. Maybe you need to change the content, or maybe you need to change the audience that you're trying to target with this email.
Do you reckon it could do it on an individual level? Because there's fake social media profiles for fake people that engage in fake ways, which in some ways, if you're measuring everything, it's going to go, oh, this is a potential lead for something. Do you reckon it'll get to a point where it'll be like, oh, this person who clicks on an ad has web social media profiles here and here and likes these brands in particular. It's like stop marketing to them because it's not real, rather than just like, not the at volume stuff, but the individuals.
A lot of that depends on how much signal we get.
Yeah.
Right? Because if all of this behavior is taking place on third party, like if I'm a brand, right? Like if I'm Marriott as an example, but a lot of this behavior is happening on non-Marriott sort of properties, digital properties. There has to be some way for Marriott to get that signal, right? Before they can detect whether this is real or not. So typically sort of that depends on what signal does Marriott actually have access to. Once they have access to that, then we could run AI or models to detect that, but it's not something that we.
Sure, it's a third-party problem.
Yeah, it's not. It's not. So typically we don't think of that as an Adobe problem.